Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Immunocompromised Status, It's Complicated, a candid conversation with a variety of health advocates about their own immunocompromised status, talking about where their experiences are similar and where they're different. My name is Matt Humbach, and I'm pleased to be moderating this session with our guests, Shonda Berry, Jeff Grubbs, and Harper Spiro. I will say Nate Appleman, celebrity chef who we've all seen on the Food Channel, had a last-minute change of plans, was not able to join us, but we certainly thank him and his son Oliver and their family for what they've done to advocate for the immunocompromised community in the past, and no doubt what they'll do in the future. So we are delighted to have our three panelists here today. And I'm going to get us started. I just would like to ask each of you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your status and your journey thus far. And we'll pick on you, Harper, to start if you want to answer first. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Harper. I am based in Tel Aviv, but currently in New York. I have a rare immune deficiency called hyper IgE syndrome or Job syndrome. I was diagnosed at 10 years old after 10 years of trying to find answers and not getting to the right doctor and getting the proper treatment. And at 27, I had a major surgery that sort of shifted my entire life to prioritize my health, speak out about it after hiding in shame for 27 years. And I now run a brand called Made Visible, where I had a 100-episode podcast. I facilitate writing classes, and I also am working with companies to help people share their stories living with invisible illnesses.
That's wonderful. Thanks again for joining us today. And Shonda, why don't you go next?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure. I am Shonda Berry. I am located in Chicago, Illinois. I was diagnosed with a form of inflammatory bowel disease. There's Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. I've been living with ulcerative colitis now for 28 years, but I suffered in silence for the first 10 years out of shame and embarrassment, as Harper mentioned early on. So from the age of 14 to 24, I was undiagnosed, in and out of flares, wasn't sure what was going on with me at the time. But I have been in and out of remission for the past, pretty much all my life, but I've been diagnosed now for the past 18 years. I'm highly active in the community as far as autoimmune diseases. I am a highly sought after advocate, and I primarily advocate in the underserved communities where there's disparities and there's a lot of issues with health equity. I have a apparel brand surrounded around creating positive messages for the community, and I'll be venturing out also creating apparel for those that suffer with chronic illnesses.
Great. Thank you again for joining us. Jeff, go ahead.
Thanks to both of you for sharing that. That's heavy duty. My story is a little shorter. I was diagnosed in 2009, 13 years ago, with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is essentially a cancer of the immune system. And unsurprisingly, very shortly, I just started getting sick all the time. All upper respiratory stuff, nothing would stop it. It was pretty brutal. And finally got my way to an immunologist who said what I should have known, which is your immune system isn't working, and diagnosed me with a common variable immunodeficiency disorder. And as a consequence, I have been on maintenance, immunoglobulin maintenance therapy. I do it subcutaneously every week, and I've been doing that for a decade. It's made a big difference. That's one of the ways now in which I actually get some of my COVID antibodies. But it was quite a shock. I had no clue any of this existed. And to complicate things a little further for me, my leukemia has been very aggressive. I've had 4 lines of treatment for the cancer. Chemotherapy, immunotherapy, 4 different new super targeted oral drugs off the assembly line, all of which either worked or didn't work, but I couldn't tolerate those that did. I recently failed off the last one. And one of the difficulties with these things is that each one of them comes with an additional nick that it takes out of your immune system. So, it's sort of in and out of not even being sure where my own immune system stands has been part of the challenge. And in June, I will start January, pardon me. In January, I will start my 5th line of treatment that will involve, and I'll be in a clinical trial that involves an immunotherapy drug, and actually 2 immunotherapy drugs in combination, plus a third one that's going to hopefully do the trick. But both of those immunotherapy drugs by themselves will deplete my immune system for at least a year. So it's for me, it's sort of in and out and up and down with exposure. Right now, I feel okay. I'm doing good, but I'm bracing myself for another round here pretty soon. I'm very active in the leukemia society, a community rather, with both the larger organizations that sort of serve blood cancer patients, as well as chairing a very large support group for people with my own disease. And as a result, I've had opportunities to teach, speak, participate like this, and it's therapeutic for me, as well as sort of helping to build a community that I think helps spread the challenges we all face with immunocompromised situations. So thank you, Matt.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I think a lot of common themes, and that's one of the goals of this session, is to share and help the folks out there who are joining us to see where their journey's similar from you all's, and maybe learn from that, and know that they're certainly not alone, but that everybody's journey is totally different. So, we're living in a different world now than we were in 2018, 2019. Back then, we would have all been sitting on a little stage in a conference room or a ballroom, in padded chairs, and all be together. But since 2020 and COVID, things are different now. And I think immunocompromised status kind of had a little bit of a moment during COVID, right? Where the whole world got a taste of what our community lives with every day. And, I think that's receded a little bit, unfortunately, and we'll certainly talk about that a little bit more. But I'd ask each of you, and we're going to start with Shonda, to talk about how, even your close circle or your work circle or the public in general, their understanding and respect for what you deal with changed due to COVID, and how that transformed a little bit. And hopefully we can take some positives, but want you to be candid and share each of your experiences. And we'll start with Shonda, then we'll go to Jeff and Harper.
Absolutely, Matt. I'm glad you asked that question, and we're talking about this today, because right before the pandemic happened, I was actually in a flare with ulcerative colitis. So anyone that's familiar with autoimmune diseases, especially Crohn's and colitis, when you're in a flare, you're stuck in the house when it's a bad one. So I already was used to being inside, can't go outside, but just to the doctor, ordering groceries. So before the pandemic, it was almost like the flare was preparing me for what was to come. And it kind of prepared my family and my support system and my friends, because they watched me during this time. I'm stuck in the house and they're taking me to my doctor's appointments. And they were like, wow, this is what you go through. This is what you have to experience. And when I'm like, yeah, I can't go outside. So when the pandemic happened, I'm like, oh, this is a cakewalk. I can do this. I was only out of the flare for maybe 45 days, and then we were back on lockdown. So my friends, family, and support system they definitely got a taste of my world, and they are more understanding of what I go through now when I'm in a flare and I can't come outside. It's like I'm back in the pandemic on lockdown again, but they definitely understand now from seeing me.
Very good. Sad but true. And I think, the immunocompromised community can testify that they had a big tolerance build up for kind of isolation and a lot of the measures that everybody had to do during COVID. So Jeff, why don't you go ahead and share your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's similar in some ways, but different in some ways. I've got sort of two worlds really when it comes to immunocompromised challenges. One is, a big world for me is the blood cancer community. I'm just plugged in a million different places and helping advocate for lots of things. And most people with blood cancer, especially my disease, they get it. They know because all of them are immunocompromised. And so there's a certain level of anxiety and information sharing that comes just from that. But there is understanding. But then I've got this other world, including family and friends and colleagues and social stuff and just everything, who honestly still have no clue. They did not know what immunocompromised was before, and they still don't. It's just this word. It's not them, it has not made a difference for them, to be honest, to go through COVID. What it has done is to make them scared. They now know what happens to people, when you're vulnerable, and they felt vulnerable. So, to me, that's a teaching moment. You can kind of take that and say, look, this is what we're all up against on immuno issues. But I do find that I just have this kind of split in my circles on how people are reacting and how I can help serve and teach.
Great. Harper, what about you?
So it's interesting because I always think back to, I think it was January 2020. I had a client come to my office and she walked in coughing and sneezing. And I was like, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. I thought I made it pretty clear as someone being immunocompromised, about my health. And she didn't really think about it. And I still give her a hard time to this day. We have a good relationship, but it was a pre-COVID moment. And I think people in general were not thinking of me as someone who is susceptible to getting the flu and it being deathly. And I think the pandemic definitely changed that, where I, for the first time in my life, prioritized my health in a way that I had to create boundaries that most people around me were not creating. And I isolated in a way that most people that I'm usually around didn't. And I had to communicate. When you see on the TV, these people are dying who have lung conditions, which is my main issue. This is really scary for me, and I have to take this seriously. So, getting the vaccine was a game changer. And I can't tell you how many people cried out of happiness when I got the vaccine on my behalf because they knew how important it was to me. I think that there's a level of people understanding now. I think that companies are starting to prioritize their employees' health and mental health and are sort of forced to do that. So I think it's helping those of us who have been dealing with this for many years to know that people are caring a little bit more about this. But I do think there's always going to be this segment of we're the left behind crowd, and no one fully understanding it, especially because it's invisible. No one can see what the inside of my lung looks like on a daily basis. I'm high functioning and people, see a productive person, but don't know what goes on behind the scenes of why I'm so high risk.
So Harper, would you say then from your lens, like the COVID kind of bump of understanding and knowledge about being immunocompromised was a little bit superficial and short-lived, or you think there was any kind of overall net impact on the public consciousness? What would be your reaction to that?
I'm split. I think there's a part of it where people know the word in a way that they may never have heard of it or known what it meant.
Yeah.
I think the problem is that if people have not experienced it themselves, or do not have family members or close friends or colleagues that have shared their experiences that they can really connect to, it's hard for people to get it and figure out why it's relevant to them. So much of the messaging in those early days were protect the people around you who are immunocompromised. And I don't think everyone knew that there were people around them unless it was their inner circle. So I don't want to say superficial, but I also think back to the thing about companies is that a lot of companies are just sort of trying to check a box and say, hey, we did a workshop related to, immunocompromised or invisible illness. We did the right thing for our small little group of people that may have stuff. But are they actually taking care of and supporting their employees? That's something I'm helping to work towards.
Okay, that's great. Jeff, Shonda, I didn't know if either one of you wanted to weigh in about superficial bump and understanding, or you think there's a lasting element there. What are your thoughts?
I think it is. Go ahead.
I'm
first.
Shonda, go ahead.
I agree with Harper. I'm a little torn. It was talked about a lot in the beginning of the pandemic, but then it started to change. And it's almost like it's not as talked about as much. So we still need to keep talking about it. Companies need to still do more than just check a box. Like, it has to be talked about every single day, whether something's going on in the world or not. I know I've been living with this for 28 years, and my close circle didn't really understand the magnitude of it until I went into a deep, deep flare. And then having the pandemic come right after that, it was like, hey, I cannot get sick. You just saw what I went through. So unless, like Harper said, if someone's super close to you in that house and they see what you're going through, they may understand. But no, just going to the grocery store, going to get gas, hey, I don't think the world gets it all the way just yet.
What do you think, Jeff?
They nailed it. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing to add to that. I think you guys just nailed it.
Yeah, I certainly can't add anything to what they characterized there. But Chuck Lahey, who's a longtime member of the PI community and advocate, I think he put it really well and succinctly. He said, our community doesn't have the luxury of being apathetic about COVID. We can't just move on and forget it. The world can move on, but we can't. So I think that's something we all really need to continue to support each other on and have conversations about. But the next topic I want to hit is about each of your kind of safety measures that you undertake with your condition. And obviously within the immunocompromised community, there's a full spectrum of types of diagnosis. There's a full spectrum of severity of diagnosis. And then within that, there's a spectrum of risk tolerance and how risk averse or accepting you are. So Jeff, we'll start with you, but talk about, tactically, some of the safety precautions you do take and need to take and want to take in your day-to-day life. And kind of a two-part question, run through those, but then also how does that limit your ability to do things you would really like to do or are passionate about, and maybe some limitations that those safety measures cause you?
Well, for me, individual, and I think, for everybody in general, it's such an individual set of decisions, and I don't basically decide much without a conversation with my immunologist or his nurse. And I just need qualified advice about exactly where I stand. I've got a cancer that affects one part of the immune system, but it doesn't affect every part of the immune system, and how I respond to the vaccines and so forth is something that it takes an immunologist to help, me understand. But I do what I need to do and what every blood cancer patient should do, and each of us should be doing, and that's be fully vaxxed, fully boosted. And there is Evusheld, another prophylactic medication that's now available for immunocompromised people. It comes with some price, or I should say some risk, but it adds a whole nother layer of protection. And for us in the blood cancer community, it's a must do. Of course, I did it and keep it up to speed. And then from there, the decisions begin to flow. And of course, I follow personally the CDC guidelines, which does mean going outside sometimes in loose situations without a mask. I do that. And I'm comfortable with that as long as I have a way of really using some common sense. If I get close to a place where there are people together, like my wife and I decided to go ahead and risk it all and go to a baseball game. And I live in Washington, D.C., and there was not a lot of risk here because we have an absolutely abysmal baseball team in this major league. And so, of course, the park was practically empty. So it was a sort of a low risk thing, but it was going out in a public situation and doing it. And even there, there's lines to get a beer and things like that. You don't do that. You just have to use common sense. But I did find that I could find my own stride here in a way that worked. I've not had COVID. Neither is my wife, who in some ways is as vulnerable as I am for other reasons. You just really have to be thoughtful about it and taking every single precaution you possibly can. I do know people who had no response to the vaccines. I was fortunate that I did, and have to make different decisions. And of course, operating from different starting points in the PI spectrum. But as things have unfolded, to me, it's sort of a changing experience as we go along, because among other things, some of these vaccines and Evusheld have expiration dates, and you have to make additional decisions about what you really need to do to make sure your protection is maintained. And for me personally, that does mean getting really qualified advice. I'm just very fortunate to have a way of doing that.
Yeah, that's great. And it's awesome that you have a great relationship and a resource in an immunologist that you can consult there. So Harper, why don't you talk to us about the precautions that you take and maybe some of the limitations it presents on you, and then we'll go to Shonda.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jeff's comment about common sense is very much where I stand. A year ago, I didn't attend a wedding that I was supposed to play a big role in because it was indoors, and I was totally not open to doing that. In August, I went to one indoors, unmasked, took a little bit of a, should I do this? Do I do this? And I did it, and I didn't get COVID, and I'm so glad I went. So I'm like, playing around with what level of risk I'm okay with. I went to a concert last fall, and I stood in the back with a mask, outdoors, near nobody. I was at that same venue last week, maskless and closer to the front. So I'm, pushing my limits a little bit, but I think a big part of it is when I think about Omicron, when it hit, and being fully isolated after not being isolated for a while, it takes a toll on your mental health, or at least it did for me. And it came to, what is my quality of life that we're 2+ years into this at that time? How do I continue to move forward? Because this thing is always going to be around. There's going to be new viruses that could be dangerous. I need to live my life. So I won't get on a plane without a mask or be in the airport for a single minute without a mask. To your point about Evusheld, I learned about that from the IDF right when it came out. I've gotten 2 rounds of it. I will get a 3rd by the end of the year. So I'm doing what I can while trying to live life as quote unquote normally as possible, because I just think there's no end in sight. And I think the vaccines and the treatments that are out as of the last 6 to 8 months are way more promising than where we were, a year ago. So I again, it goes back to common sense and just going, what's worth the potential risk? And where do I say, all right, I can't do this, I can't attend this. I wasn't doing indoor dining until about 3 months ago when it just got too hot to eat outside. And I said, I'm willing to do this. And, knock on wood, I've been good so far.
Yeah, that's great. Shonda, what's your perspective?
I have to agree with both of them. Common sense is the most important thing, and you have to do what you feel is best for you, because you know your body, and we all react to autoimmune diseases and other illnesses differently. But I will say I was one of the people that was on the fence about the vaccine at first. I was just so afraid that it was going to cause a flare, that it was going to affect my autoimmune disease. And I was in a good space, and I just didn't want to rock the boat. So for a while, I didn't get the vaccine, but I ended up getting COVID twice. And it was no fun. It was no fun at all. And, luckily, though, my whole family around me got the vaccine because of me. And here I am, I didn't have it. But I've learned to trust my healthcare team and to do what I feel is best. Got the vaccine. It was fine. It was okay. But common sense is very, very important. And then too, if someone is inviting me somewhere and I know they've the flu or they've had some other form of a cough or respiratory issue, I have to use my judgment depending on how I'm feeling. I may not go. If I do decide to go, I'm definitely wearing a mask. I am still a person that keeps the hand sanitizer with me. I keep my mask with me. I will sometimes risk it all and go outside without a mask, but that's because I may be in a safe space where there's no other people around me. So I just try to be cautious and use common sense, get my vaccines. I'm scheduled for my flu shot soon. So I just try to keep myself in the best health as possible. Working with my healthcare team and using common sense is important.
Hey, Matt, may I make an additional point?
Please.
When I introduced myself, I talked about how cancer treatment tends to come and go, and it can affect the immune system. And for those of us in the cancer community, and I imagine others as well, there is this additional challenge of your immune system situation can change radically. And mentally, I've not yet honestly come to terms with the fact that I'm going to lose it all again starting in January. I'll be back to a baby again, and it's even the vaccines, everything gets wiped out. And I have not gotten depressed, which means I'm really not dealing with this yet. But that's just a fact of life for us. And again, I think for others, I'm sure that immunodeficiency is not a fixed situation that you just have and come to terms with. For many people, and including me, it can really change from time to time. And just sort of getting used to one thing and then you've got to change to another is you can do it. I'll do it, and I'll be fine. I mean, I will make it through this. It's just something you have to be conscious of and come to terms with.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
If I can add one other.
Go ahead.
If I can add one other thing, I was just thinking based on what Shonda said, is I think another layer of this and bringing back to educating other people and people being aware of the immunocompromised is I think that we're having to, or at least I'm finding I'm having to advocate for myself in a different way in recent months because most people are talking about it. Back when the pandemic happened, which is still alive and, unwell. And so I think it's really important for us to be able to say, hey, this is why I'm wearing a mask, whether you feel like you need to explain yourself or not. I think that people understanding that you're still at risk more than they may be taking as seriously because they are not immunocompromised. And that's its own layer of like, we have to be responsible for other people's actions because they're not thinking about us. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've faced over the last few years is having to go, hey, I'm really at risk in a different way than you are. And here are the precautions that you could take that potentially could help me. And I think people can be a bit selfish. So it's finding those people that you surround yourself with that go, hey, I have a cold. I know you were going to come over. Maybe it's not a good idea. I'll leave it to your discretion if you want to come over. And obviously that's when I go, yeah, not necessary, not coming over. But thanks for the heads up and knowing the importance of prioritizing, your well-being because no one else is going to like you do.
Yeah, great point. We've touched on a couple important things here. First of all, it seems like all three of you have really outstanding mental outlooks. I'm sure that hasn't always been the case. All that ebbs and flows like everything else, but you're navigating some tough stuff. There's ever-changing, evolving statuses of your own diagnoses and journey. There's new treatment options. All different things influence the path that you take. Our next topic we want to talk about, we want to look at how patients can best use support systems like advocacy groups. And you all seem to have great personal support systems with a medical team you've touched on, family that's there and supportive. Not everybody, as we all know, has that luxury, but if we could talk about advocacy groups, and we'll start with you, Jeff, and what you would advise people who are on their own journey on how best to use them. And I think it would be really interesting to hear each of you talk about how you leveraged and used advocacy groups early on in your journey when it was all new and you were trying to figure some things out. But now that you've got some time under your belt, if the way you use them has evolved and changed. So Jeff, we'll start with you. We'll go to Shonda, and then we'll go to Harper.
Well, to me, the key from the beginning, and it actually has not changed, is just fundamental information. I mean, access to information to simply understand in a scientifically peer-reviewed, defensible way exactly where we stand on the challenges we face, both from COVID and from other sources, and what precautions we can take. And of course, there were a lot of missteps and terrible communication at the beginning with the CDC and a couple of the others that just had a terrible time in trying to get the messaging straight on this. But I did find that the information that flowed from the advocacy groups, including and especially IDF, was extremely helpful. It was just solid. People in those organizations, and for myself, it's Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Lymphoma Research Foundation, and the CLL Society. And all of them took a lot of care themselves to just be aware of their own immunocompromised constituencies. But the access to information from those sources at the beginning was really important. And finally, the CDC and the government started getting its act back together again. And we're getting more, and FDA began to be a little more rigorous and consistent in the decisions it was making. But in terms of the information, the advocacy groups to me were absolutely crucial. And the flip side of that, of course, is spreading the understanding. It's not just me looking at websites, it's also me talking with the communities and making sure people that I work with and talk with know where to go in order to get the best peer-reviewed and reliable information. And IDF, I think, just did a terrific job through the whole process here and remains just a solid source of information I know I need. And I think most people do.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And first of all, thanks IDF for facilitating this conversation and having this forum for us today. I think it's just emblematic of how they're not a giant organization. They're nimble enough and small enough to be tuned in and proactive about finding out what the needs of the PI community, but more and more the greater immunocompromised community, what their needs are. And I think, gosh, hats off to them, how proactive and quick they were when COVID hit to find resources and put physicians and factual scientific information in front of the community to help guide those decisions. Because, man, if you don't have that, you're rudderless. Like that's your North Star. If you don't have that, that's your starting point. So yeah, grateful to have that for the community and to be a small part of that. So Shonda, why don't you talk us through your experience with advocacy groups and when you first started out, how you used it and leveraged it and how that's changed over time?
Absolutely. It's changed for me, definitely, from how it started to versus how it's going now. In the beginning, I was just so sick with that flare that I can't get out of my mind before the pandemic that, I was being told that I may lose my colon. And then I had some other complication that was life-threatening. And I was just searching for whatever I can find to help me and my healthcare team get out of that flare. Whether, we have social media, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have different support groups, you have different non-for-profit organizations that has information available as well. So I was just looking for any and everything related to inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, to see what I could find that could help me. And I found that there was a lot of information out there for me. There was a lot of people in my shoes that had great advice for me. I went through a couple of different doctors. So I believe the tools and resources are there. We just have to dig and get them. Now, fast forward to today, I am that person that is advocating. I'm that person when there's someone like me that was suffering like I was years ago, I'm that person offering to help. I'm telling my experience, my story, my journey, giving them tricks and tips that I do. So today I am the person that's out there on the forefront, traveling, speaking about my condition and doing the advocacy work to make changes within the community.
Interesting. Yeah. And gosh, thank goodness, we have the World Wide Web and the internet, like, and social media. Like, think about if you were just counting on, something coming in the mail or finding something at the library. It's really, you shudder to think 25 years ago what people were up against. Harper, what about you?
So I never had any sort of community around my condition until I was 27 and started talking about it because I had so much shame around it. I knew nobody with other health conditions. I was very isolated around this. And it's funny, Matt, that you bring up the something in the mail because I got an IDF brochure in the mail a year after having major surgery in 2013 and ended up coming to the conference randomly that year. And that was my first touch point to, oh, there's other people that are going through stuff like this. I'm not alone. I know my condition is rare, but all these people are going through similar experiences and also have my doctor. So that was really, really life changing. I'm now on the board of the IDF as of almost a year ago. So I'm very involved with the IDF these days. And then for me, after that period of time, I would search the internet for content that resonated with me and always found stuff to be very depressing and didn't really resonate with my lifestyle and the way in which I lived. And that's why I just decided to create my own podcast and my own brand around advocating for people with invisible illnesses and helping other people to share their story. There's a Facebook group that I am part of people with my condition that I learned about through the IDF. I honestly go in there sparingly. It's really are other people getting a certain vaccine? Has anyone ever dealt with this symptom? I have one friend who has my condition who I'm in regular contact with, but in general, I tend to stick one-to-one in having people that I connect with. And then in building my business through writing classes and corporate work and the podcast, I've built this community of people all over the world living with rare diseases and invisible illnesses. So I feel like I've been the one spearheading, creating what I wish existed for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, kudos to you for kind of as a spinoff and creating your own community there, because it's such an individualized thing and people communicate and have different styles and have different levels of comfort with different things. So a little sidebar question, Harper, you talked about suffering in silence, and I mean, Shonda alluded to it too. Was that like random brochure in the mail? Was that what kind of made you more public and comfortable, that process, not just the brochure, but the introduction to IDF? Is that what helped you with your comfort level?
I would say initially it was that I was about to have the surgery that I was informed I may not survive. And I had to start telling people, my closest friends, hey, by the way, I have this rare condition and I'm having surgery, and it's because of this condition that I'm having this surgery. So it was impossible to hide. But it's one thing to just start telling your friends and family. It's another to write and get press for it and join a board and start a podcast and all of this. Yeah. And I get this question all the time of like, why did you go from 0 to 100? And I think I just realized how much I wished I had that support that I was not open to. I don't blame anyone for it but myself, but I was not open to it for so long. And I think attending the conference for me was just an awareness that there were other people going through this. And I could choose to have whatever level of connection, whether it was one-on-one or attending conferences in person or being part of it. I had that choice in how I engage, and everyone having different levels of interest in being connected with other people who get it. What I learned from my podcast so much is that people with bipolar disorder, someone with cancer, someone with cystic fibrosis, and I can all sit in a room, and while our diagnosis is totally different and our backgrounds may be different, our experiences emotionally and mentally and dealing with doctors and family and friends and society are very aligned. And there's something really magical about building a community or being part of a community where people just get it.
Shonda, what about you? Could you share maybe what flipped for you from, the suffering in silence to being part of a community?
Yes. So there's two answers to that question. I suffered in silence from 14 to 24. And like I said earlier, at the time, I didn't know what was happening because the flares would come and they would go. That was remission. I had no idea at that age that what was going on. I thought to myself, am I dying? What's going on here? But then I'm like, I can't be, because this has been going on for years. I don't know. So I suffered all those years, and it wasn't until I got pregnant with my daughter and I went into a full remission, and I still didn't know it was remission at the time. But after I had her, my symptoms came back with a vengeance, and I told myself, I have a child now and she needs a mother, so I need to find out what's going on with me. And that's when I got my first colonoscopy. And they told me, hey, you have ulcerative colitis. It's manageable. You'll have this for the rest of your life. And I was like, ulcerative what? I never heard of this. And you mean to tell me I'm not dying? And they're like, no, but you need to get colonoscopies every year because colon cancer runs in your family. So I'm like, okay, all right. So at that time, got a diagnosis because of my daughter. She needed her mom. And I just kind of still stayed a little bit quiet. Told my friends, yeah, I have a diagnosis. I'll take medicine. That's it. But it wasn't until 2019, right before the pandemic, that worst of my life almost took me out, that I remember promising God, if you bring me out of this, I promise I will advocate. I will do everything that I can for those that suffer from this condition, because I can only imagine people that are suffering in silence what they're going through. And if I can do anything to help them amplify their voice, that's what I will do. So it was that last flare that almost took me out that really said, hey, I got to do something. I have to do my part.
Jeff, is there with your diagnosis, you're a bit of a unique case. Was there ever a time where you kind of weren't out there in terms of what was going on with your health, or you've always been an open book and secret?
Yeah, it's just sort of the way I was born, I think. I'm sort of a pathological extrovert. I'm not comfortable unless I am talking about things. And I always think, well, this is just because if somebody doesn't know what's happening with me, I think they should know, because I can explain this to them and make them aware. And that's my natural instinct. And I find it therapeutic, frankly. But I fully understand where you folks are coming from, and so many others are. It's just my own approach is much more, just tell it like it is.
Yeah.
Get out there and to help, lead by bringing other people with you and finding them, and bring them along. So it's style as much as anything.
Go for it, Shonda.
I just wanted to say, so with this disease, of course, colonoscopies are imperative. I've had 24 colonoscopies so far. And in my community and where I come from, we don't talk about colonoscopies. We don't talk about blood in the stool. The symptoms they're embarrassing. I was ashamed. And, had to get to a place where, you know what? Hey, this is my life I'm talking about here. I don't care if people are going to judge me. I don't care what they have to say. And there are people that are suffering as well. And I need to talk about colonoscopies. I need to talk about poop and blood in my stool. Like, there's no shame in it when you feel like, okay, is this the end of my life right now? I got to do something. Yeah. So now it's like, hey, in certain communities, we just don't talk about certain symptoms, but it needs to be talked about, because you can literally be saving someone's life.
Oh yeah. As long as we're on this rip here, I will say that, to me, the biggest fear and the thing I was most afraid of was people feeling sorry for me. I just didn't want to be anybody's baby. And I knew that as soon as people knew I had cancer, it was, they were no longer going to say, how are you? It was going to be, how are you? With some real deep concern. And in fact, that is what happens all the time. It changes your identity for me. And that was very, very scary. And so, yeah, Shonda, I hear you.
Harper, what did you have to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking, when I was first diagnosed at 10, my doctor had suggested that I go to the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, saying this is the team that knows your condition. But I didn't want to be a guinea pig. Right. So to me, I had been to enough doctors. My health was under control at that point. And it wasn't until this time when I was about to have surgery that I went down to the NIH. And the value that they provide by being a research hospital, I now will give them anything they ask. I get calls every few months of, can you provide, an interview for an hour and a half to do research? If it can help someone else, I think there's so much value in that, but it took many years to get that. And I think it's a reminder to those who are here watching, that there's no right way for how to do this. It's whatever feels good for you. It goes back to the common sense of you deciding, do you want to share, how much do you want to share, when you share it, and with whom? Because there's no standard and there's no rule book for how you do it. But I do think the more you share, the more you advocate for yourself and those with whatever it is that you're living with, the more people will feel less isolated in what they're going through.
So that's a great point, Harper. And was there ever a point in not just your diagnosis and journey there, but your journey as an advocate where you were putting yourself out there a little bit and you're like, man, I don't know if I can do this, but you pushed yourself to do it. And then afterwards you were grateful that you did, and it really catalyzed you to do even more?
I think that sometimes it's scary to get into the nitty gritty of some of the stuff that I dealt with when I was a kid. It was sort of, to your point, Shonda, grosser things that people are not really interested in hearing about, but it was my reality.
Yeah.
And so I think it's scary sometimes to go like, oh, there's a video online of me talking about having boils and cysts and my fingernails falling off. Not the most glamorous thing, but it was my reality when I was a kid. So I think I am grateful because people go, oh, this is the stuff that is, visible to the naked eye or not, that could be beneficial to know about. I've never regretted sharing anything. I have become more conscious of sharing things after it happens as opposed to before, because I find that people often want to check in, and then I feel responsible for their navigating my health and my reactions.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're here today as part of the conference, and you guys being on this panel is an act of advocacy on its own right. I think maybe a mini goal of this session is to create other advocates and have people step out of the shadows to get more out of interacting with the community, but also raising their voice. I'd invite you guys to share, and we'll start with Shonda. What have been the things, and you talked about some of them, that you've done to advocate that have been really successful and helpful to you and helpful to others. But, everything doesn't always go perfectly. Are there other ways you've raised your voice where maybe that wasn't for you, or it didn't have the impact that you thought it would? Any observations you'd share, Shonda?
Well, I try to align myself in a lane that I can relate to. So I haven't had any, I want to say, negative experiences or anything like that. But doing podcasts and interviews and magazine articles and even roundtables like this have been most helpful. The more I do it, the more my voice is amplified, the more I can help someone else amplify their voice. I do I'll put myself out there. And if an opportunity comes back, if I feel like it's a good fit, I'll definitely roll with it. But I don't want to speak on something that I have no knowledge or education about, because I don't want to confuse anyone. So I just try to stay aligned with what I know. That way I can ensure that I'm helping the person that needs the help.
And Harper, what about you?
I agree with that completely. And I think the other thing is, Jeff mentioned before this concept of people feeling bad for him. And I really relate to that. And one of the lessons that I have learned over the last year or so is communicating with people and saying what language is helpful to hear. My best friend sent me flowers after I had surgery, and the card said, "Dear Harper's lungs, you suck. We love you." And that's my language. That's how I communicate.
Gifts and sarcasm. That's your language. Gifts and sarcasm.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. No roses. But it was something that they were speaking my language, as opposed to, "We're so sad for you. We feel so bad. We don't know what to do." This sort of woe is me. That's not my attitude, and that's not the attitude I want surrounding me. So I think helping people learn what language is helpful for you or what's valuable. If you're going through a flare, what do you want from people? Do you want them to just check in so that they, that you're loved and you're being thought about? Do you need something? Like, how can you express to people what's important to you? Because otherwise, people don't know. And, to Shonda's point with podcasts and getting out there and sharing your story, I think one of the biggest things is getting on platforms that are not preaching to the choir. So not just speaking to the invisible illness or to the PI community, but expanding beyond, like women's magazines or whatever it may be. I think about one of the podcast guests that I had was SD Haim of a band called Haim that has a huge reach. And I had one of the sisters on the podcast about diabetes. And you can go on all these major music and entertainment sites, and she's talking about her diabetes. That's huge for diabetes to get that kind of exposure from this major rock star. So finding these angles and ways to talk to people that wouldn't otherwise know, instead of just constantly speaking to the same people who, already know the message and already are going through it.
Yeah, great perspective. Jeff, what would you say?
Well, there's a lot of different dimensions to this for me. I mean, first, I love this. I love this sort of setting where organizations, including IDF, will pull together panels of people to really talk about experiences, share information, and be able to help people come to grips with, not only are they not alone, but sort of where to go and what sort of support to get for what you're doing. And I find that in lots of places. In my own disease, we used to have it. We started I live in Washington, D.C., and we had a small bunch of local people who had the same disease I did. We sit around a table at a safe place in suburban Virginia somewhere. And with COVID, we went to Zoom. And Zoom has turned out to be the biggest darn help. Beyond what I imagined for us. We went from about 15 to 20 people around a table. And now we have over 200 people in our support group. And that's just this local one. We have snowbirds in Florida and Arizona. People just join us, one from Mexico and Alaska. They just sort of want to get hooked in and find us. And so there's a certain connection and things like that happen. And immuno issues get talked about all the time because we're all immunocompromised. It's really important. And for me, I just find it in lots of places. Connecting people, building communities like we've been talking about, sharing information is huge. Another one for me is I'm really interested in the science because so much of how my disease is managed anyway is with the science, which is moving and changing rapidly. And there's a hunger for a voice of an actual human walking patient. In the pharmaceutical companies and in their marketing departments and elsewhere as they figure out what they're going to really do as they go through things. Same with the federal approval process for medications. They use patients and even scoring and peer reviewing research applications for funding in other locations. And I just find that there's lots of places and lots of outlets that I can put my voice for science but be the voice of the patient. Anywhere that you can find it. And immunocompromised issues are absolutely a part of who we're about and what it's about. It's a cancer of the immune system. And so I find all kinds of ways like that to do it. But if there's something I love, it's this. And somebody said it before. It's, thank you, IDF, for pulling this group together and for just making this happen. I think it's a wonderful thing. And that's how we support each other and grow and learn with each other. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got 5 or so minutes left, but still plenty of time to go through kind of a final query of the group here. And, again, so great to see positive mental outlooks and, a great mentality in all this. But, it's not all roses. You guys are dealing with something that's extremely challenging just in its own right, not to mention the old trope of you don't look sick, but here you are dealing with some really heavy medical diagnoses and prospective psychological effects. But I'd like to start with Shonda, but let's talk about, as you look to the future, you look ahead, what concerns you most about your journey ahead? And what gives you the most hope as you look ahead? Go ahead, Shonda.
What concerns me most is the flares. How long will it stay at bay, and if it will stay at bay? Like, how long will this remission last? Because I'm doing wonderful, I'm doing good, I try to manage my stress as much as possible because for me, that's a trigger. So if I can keep that in check, I know I'm okay, but it's always lingering in the back of my mind. Will this something happen, or will this event happen, or will something go on in the world that will just stress me out to the point where I'll flare again? So I just try to remain in control. That's like my biggest concern with this disease. So I try to remain in control, stay stress-free and positive, and continuously leave an impact. And something that I'm looking to in the future is continuously advocating, just continuously putting out there my journey and helping and just making people aware that there is a community that's out here that will help. We all are warriors. Jeff is a warrior. Harper is a warrior. If there's anyone else on here that's suffering, they are warriors too, no matter what the illness is. We all are warriors. And I tell people all the time, what we deal with these conditions are tough, but we are tougher. And what makes us tougher is the fight that we go through every day to stay well. I just want to encourage people to find their tribe, find their people, find their community, so they can, learn how to fight through and get through the other side. But regardless, they will come out warriors.
Yeah, it's a great message. And Jeff, you alluded to some heavy stuff coming your way in a couple months, but talk a little bit more about what concerns you but what gives you that hope and optimism moving forward.
Well, if there's something that I really am anxious about, really for the community at large more than myself, it's probably the financial aspects of everything we do. I mean, my Hizentra is $14,000 a month off the shelf. I've been doing it for 10 years. I'll do it the rest of my life. I made, through total luck, I made a lot of good decisions about insurance before I really got sick. But many people don't have that luck. And the coverage and the ability of people to really get the care and the quality advice they need, and most especially the medications that many of us need, is just really a scary proposition when I think about it. And I'm not even into the next pandemic yet. I mean, this is just daily living kinds of things. We've muddled through in this country, and we probably muddle through this, but it's still, in terms of things I get scared and anxious about, this stuff is just expensive. By the way, what I'll start next year is going to be a clinical trial at National Institutes of Health, Harper, at the National Cancer Institute there. And of course, everything is free when you do it there, and it's absolutely top quality stuff. But again, I'm lucky because that's 20 minutes of my house. I don't believe that everybody can do that. I'm just fortunate. But the money stuff is a real thing. In terms of the future, and actually apropos of the trial up with NIH, to me, the hope in this is the science. I mean, there's a lot of science that's moving really fast. Information and understanding is quick. If you think about it, the early days of COVID, and I lost close friends. Other people have too, I'm sure. Nobody had the slightest clue of what was going on. No idea. And really, but within a year and a half or so, not only do we understand the way of transmission, but vaccines were becoming available and so on. I mean, the speed at which the science can respond to some of the challenges that we face, to me, is hope. I mean, that was not a fun year and a half, and I don't want to do it again. Thank you, but there's hope in this. That there is knowledge, and there are people working hard on this that help us and can really help produce. And I think others have alluded to this, but the awareness of the kinds of challenges we face, the strengthening and broadening of our community of immunocompromised people is growing. And the more of that, and COVID, I think, did help on that. We all got airtime out of that one way or another. But it's growing. And so to me, for hope, increased awareness, solid science, and my just faith in people is going to kind of get me through all of this, I think, and all of us, I hope.
That's awesome. Well, Harper, we'll throw it to you with the lightning round answer with 1 minute left. What gives you the most hope and optimism, and what concerns you?
I'd say on the concern front, the key word is the uncertainty. it was 27 years until I dealt with something major. So what does 5 years from now look like? What does 27 years look like from now? I have no idea, and my doctors have no idea either. So just that living with who knows what happens next. At the same time, I trust and love my doctors in several different states and countries that work super well together. And I'm so grateful for them for seeing eye to eye and brainstorming what's best for me and other patients with my condition. And I also think the work of the IDF is huge. What we are working on and what we are working towards as we build this like bigger, better, more established organization. I think there's so much that can be done and will be done, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thanks, Shonda. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks, Harper, for joining us. Wonderful conversation. Great to connect with you guys. Let's keep the conversation going. And to everybody out there joining us today, wonderful to have you. And thanks for listening and being part of the community.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Take care, guys.